In March 2025, the American Association of University Professors filed a lawsuit against Secretary of State Marco Rubio, challenging, in their words, a Trump administration policy of targeting non-citizen students and faculty members for arrest and deportation based on their lawful political speech, particularly pro-Palestinian advocacy. Lawyers for the plaintiff called Peter Hatch as a witness. Hatch is Assistant Director of the Homeland Security Investigations Department within ICE. He confirmed that he has used the Canary Mission's website to find international students in order to investigate and deport them. They apparently combed through 5,000 names. The Canary Mission is known to many of you as an organization that doxes individuals, students and professors namely, for their support for the Palestinian cause. Unfortunately, these professors and especially students are doubtless unable to mount a substantial defense against such doxing. Never mind the weight of the Department of Homeland Security when that doxed information is used to investigate them. If individuals have already been targeted and face dire consequences for speaking out in support of Palestine, then perhaps it would be useful to expose the pro-Israel sympathies of powerful people that have all the resources in the world to defend themselves. Students and teachers don't have corporate law firms to protect them. I'd like to examine specifically individuals in the American news media. I'd argue that there is certainly a far more urgent need to expose the pro-Israel sympathies of powerful executives who wield enormous influence on Americans' understanding of world events and, in particular, the genocide of Palestinians being committed by the State of Israel. Support for the latter, the perpetrators of a genocide, is far more damning as compared to the former, the target and victims of said genocide. Genocide is a word that should be used without hesitation or qualification, since the growing and prevalent opinion is apparent from a recent resolution passed by the International Association of Genocide Scholars, who are some 500 scholars of genocide and the Holocaust. The IAGS concluded Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians pursuant to the 1948 Genocide Convention. The IAGS is the largest organization of its kind in the world. Since then, the United Nations has reported that an independent inquiry has ruled the same, the first such development from the UN. This follows a lengthy and damning report titled Our Genocide by Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, and similar conclusions from several Israeli Holocaust scholars, including Raz Siegel, Amos Goldberg, Daniel Blattman, and Omer Bartov. I'd like to begin with CBS, which is owned by Paramount Skydance, whose chairman and CEO is David Ellison. But David's father, Larry Ellison, controls the company, the New York Times reported. Larry is one of the wealthiest people on Earth. He apparently became the richest person briefly in September 2025. One of the founders of Oracle Corporation, he remains their executive chairman and their chief technical officer. Their CEO is Israeli-American Safra Katz. Katz and Ellison have made their support for Israel clear to their employees. When they opened a data center in Jerusalem in 2021, Katz said, "Our commitment to Israel is second to none. This is a free world and I love my employees, and if they don't agree with our mission to support the state of Israel, then maybe we aren't the right company for them. Larry and I are publicly committed to Israel and devote personal time to the country, and no one should be surprised by that." Ellison also, as reported by Variety in 2017, gave Friends of the Israel Defense Forces the largest donation in its history at more than $16 million. He's reportedly friends with Netanyahu, and the Prime Minister vacationed at the Hawaiian island of Lanai, which is 98% owned by the billionaire. It's little surprise Paramount became the first major Hollywood studio to condemn a recently announced boycott of Israeli film institutions supported by some 4,000 actors and directors. Developments at CBS are worrisome enough to spur anonymous complaints to the media from company employees. The Independent recently reported, Earlier this month, it was reported that Ellison was on the verge of purchasing the Free Press for well above $100 million and installing its stridently pro-Israel, anti-woke founder Bari Weiss into a senior leadership role at CBS News. Weiss, who was an opinion columnist for the New York Times before launching her heterodox media empire, would potentially be named the network's editor-in-chief or co-president as part of the deal. One CBS journalist told The Independent, "The idea that the overvaluation of a rag like the Free Press is going to give Bari Weiss riches beyond her wildest dreams is adding insult to injury to most of the real journalists at CBS News. One, she's not a journalist as far as we're concerned. And two, the idea that she's going to carry some sort of editorial stick for us is hard to swallow." At the same time, Larry and David Ellison are preparing a majority cash bid to purchase Warner Brothers Discovery and combine it with Paramount, creating an immense media powerhouse and potentially merging CBS with CNN, which would drastically reshape the news landscape. Indeed, CNN is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery. In February 2024, Philip Weiss of Mondoweiss observed, "CNN's bias toward Israel starts at the top." Weiss declared plainly, David Zaslav, the CEO of CNN's parent company, is a Zionist. Hey everybody, due to the content of my videos, I'm not advertiser friendly, so if you want to support my work, consider becoming a patron for access to exclusive content and the GDF Discord server. I also accept donations. Thank you so much to everyone who has become a patron and donated. Love you all, thank you. There is an unusually frank primary source to support this. It's an interview Zaslav gave with the Israeli I-24 News, where he praised the bombing of the King David Hotel in British Mandatory Palestine.
I love Israel.
Yeah.
Tel Aviv was fantastic. I remember one Christmas with my whole family walking into the King David, remembering what happened to the King David, and thinking about how lucky we are to have Israel and what it took. And the strength of the Haganah and the Irgun and the heart of the Israeli people to fight for a free democracy.
ABC is owned by Disney, whose CEO Bob Iger announced on October 12, 2023, that he would donate $2 million to humanitarian relief in Israel. This would have been 3 days after the human animals and no food and no water announcement from Israel's defense minister, a donation that was matched by Michael Bloomberg. Of course, Fox, and ultimately the Wall Street Journal for that matter, is owned by the staunchly pro-Israel Rupert Murdoch. Just in December 2024, Murdoch spoke to a congregation at Sydney's Central Synagogue before Hanukkah, saying,
"Israel, in the last 4 years, has been alone on the front line of Western democratic civilization,
defending shared values with incredible resilience." As reported by the Jerusalem Post, expressing optimism about the future, Murdoch added, "With U.S. President-elect Donald Trump returning to the White House, Israel won't be alone anymore." Following October 7th, Fox joined other mass media corporations in donating millions to Israel. NBC is owned by Comcast, whose CEO Brian L. Roberts proposed to his future wife in Israel, an avid squash player. He donated squash courts in Ra'anana, Israel. He also supports the Israeli sports group Maccabi USA and even hosted a party for athletes at Comcast's headquarters. He has a real strong affinity to Israel, said David Pudlin, a Philadelphia lawyer and Robert's squash partner. Comcast joined in donating money to relief efforts in Israel. The New York Times has come under scrutiny for its Israel reporting. In April 2024, The Intercept reported on a November 2023 memo that instructed journalists to avoid using words including genocide, ethnic cleansing, and even occupied territory. The memo also instructs reporters not to use the word Palestine except in very rare cases. and to steer clear of the term refugee camps to describe areas of Gaza historically settled by displaced Palestinians expelled from other parts of Palestine during previous Israeli-Arab wars. A spokesperson for the New York Times defended the memo, issuing guidance like this to ensure accuracy, consistency, and nuance in how we cover the news is standard practice. A defense of the memo by a company spokesperson signals that it reflects company policy, for which the chief executive, Meredith Kopit Levine, is ultimately responsible, at least in my opinion. Pro-Israel advocacy is not as well documented with Levine as with other media executives, though she is an alumna of B'nai B'rith Youth Organization. At least until 2020, Levine was serving on their Women's Leadership Initiative Advisory Council. B'nai B'rith is, among other things, a pro-Israel advocacy organization and a member of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, along with groups like AIPAC and the Zionist Organization of America. But perhaps the biggest conflict of interest can be seen in the Times Jerusalem correspondent, Isabel Kirshner. Her husband, Hirsch Goodman, was a fellow at the Israeli Institute for National Security Studies, one of the most prominent national security think tanks in the country. She reportedly relied heavily on the think tank while reporting for the Times. Her husband also served in the IDF during the 1967 war. Additionally, their 2 sons served in the Israeli army. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, and the paper has experienced a widely reported shift toward the Trump administration. Bezos personally intervened to muzzle the editorial board, keeping them from making an endorsement for a presidential candidate in the 2024 election, according to the Washington Post themselves. Since November 2023, the Post's chief executive has been William Lewis, who was formerly CEO of Dow Jones & Company and publisher of the Wall Street Journal. Though, as Al Jazeera columnist Andrew Mitrovica wrote in an opinion article, the paper has long been hawkish. Ages before Bezos bought the flailing Post, the English-speaking corporate outlets on both sides of the Atlantic have been faithful couriers to every foul aspect of the Israeli-American axis and its calamitous conduct throughout the Middle East and, of course, Gaza and the occupied West Bank. Indeed, in 2007, Chris Matthews of NBC's Hardball called the Post a neoconservative paper, evidenced by its vociferous support for the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003.
In the 6 months leading up to the invasion, the Washington Post would editorialize in favor of the war at least 27 times.
In August 2004, Howard Kurtz reported in the Post, "From August 2002 through the March 19, 2003 launch of the war, the Post ran more than 140 front-page stories that focused heavily on administration rhetoric against Iraq. Moreover, an examination of the paper's coverage and interviews with more than a dozen of the editors and reporters involved shows that the Post published a number of pieces challenging the White House, but rarely on the front page." The paper was not front-paging stuff, said Pentagon correspondent Thomas Ricks. Administration assertions were on the front page. Things that challenged the administration were on A18 on Sunday or A24 on Monday. There was an attitude among editors, look, we're going to war. Why do we even worry about all this contrary stuff? The Washington Post's pro-Israel bias provoked controversy in November 2024 when their editorial board decried the International Criminal Court for issuing arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. The editorial stated, inter alia, "To be sure, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed, but Hamas is to blame for sheltering among civilians. But Israel, as a democratic country that is committed to human rights, must take responsibility for the civilian casualty toll." These claims are complicated by the Post's own reporting. In April 2024, an analysis for the paper on the infamous Plus 972 expose on Israel's use of AI to generate targets reads, "It may have played a major role, particularly in the early stages of the current war, as Israel conducted relentless waves of airstrikes on the territory, flattening homes and whole neighborhoods. At present count, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, more than 33,000 Palestinians, the majority being women and children, have been killed in the territory. Moreover, this may help explain the scale of destruction unleashed by Israel across Gaza as it seeks to punish Hamas, as well as the high casualty count. Earlier rounds of Israel-Hamas conflict saw the Israel Defense Forces go about a more protracted, human-driven process of selecting targets based on intelligence and other data. At a moment of profound Israeli anger and trauma in the wake of Hamas's October 7th attack, the AI targeting program Lavender could have helped Israeli commanders come up with a rapid, sweeping program of retribution. According to the Plus 972 report, Israeli officials showed little squeamishness about dropping bombs on the buildings where the targets' families slept. We were not interested in killing Hamas operatives only when they were in a military building or engaged in military activity, an intelligence officer told Plus 972 and Local Call. On the contrary, the IDF bombed them in homes without hesitation. As a first option, it's much easier to bomb a family's home. Plus 972 had previously reported that since October 7th, a separate AI targeting program was designed to destroy civilian infrastructure, which the Israeli military calls power targets. The bombing of power targets, according to intelligence sources who had first-hand experience with its application in Gaza in the past, is mainly intended to harm Palestinian civil society, to create a shock that, among other things, will reverberate powerfully and lead civilians to put pressure on Hamas, as one source put it. With the destruction of entire cities and most homes in the Strip, and the demolition of buildings and homes with bulldozers, the deaths of civilians can hardly be blamed on Hamas shielding behind civilians, and it would be no less than absurd to suggest as much. It is long overdue for the American media to talk within the realm of reality and not perpetuate these absurdities. On the ICC arrest warrants specifically, the Post bemoaned, "The ICC is putting the elected leaders of a democratic country with its own independent judiciary in the same category as dictators and authoritarians who kill with impunity." The Post actually responded to criticism of this article and defended their stance. To support their notion that Israel would surely investigate allegations of war crimes, they cited the 1982 Kahan Commission that investigated the Sabra and Shatila massacres, which led to the resignation of Defense Minister Ariel Sharon. Using this example shows a profound ignorance, willful or not, of Israeli society since 1982. The editorial states finally, the ICC was established to investigate war crimes committed by member countries that have no means or mechanisms to investigate themselves. That is not the case for Israel. There was a helpful article from the Israeli Haaretz on Israel's state institutions and their suitability for investigating Israeli officials. 3 days before the ICC's warrants announcement, Haaretz revealed that Israel's Attorney General decided not to investigate Israel's leaders on suspicion of incitement to war crimes. The prospects for Israel to self-regulate its conduct in the war via the Supreme Court do not look much better. In March, a number of Israeli human rights organizations, led by Gisha, an NGO focused on Gaza, petitioned the High Court of Justice to oblige the state to supply adequate humanitarian aid to Gaza. The proceedings have dragged on for 8 months. The petition has since been rejected outright. As far back as 2014, Israeli human rights group B'Tselem concluded, Israeli authorities have proven they cannot investigate suspected violations of international humanitarian law by Israel in the Gaza Strip. In their words, there is currently no official body in Israel capable of conducting independent investigations of suspected violations of international humanitarian law, including, most importantly, investigating senior political officials and military commanders. The overall policy guiding the military's actions is laid out by senior political officials. 8 human rights organizations, including B'Tselem, appealed to the Attorney General, urging him to investigate violations of international humanitarian law during the 2008 and 9 destruction of Gaza. The Attorney General's office declined less than a week after the operation ended and before a single investigation was launched. In February 2025, Jeff Bezos shared a memo to his employees on Twitter. "I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages. We are going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars: personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others." Shortly after, Bezos hired a correspondent from The Economist to be the Post's opinion editor, who said that the opinion section would be unapologetically patriotic.
We want to use technology to improve our journalism while we host robust debates about the most important issues facing this country and the world. We're also going to be stalwart advocates of free markets and personal liberties.
This apparently also includes staunch support for the State of Israel. Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching, and if you liked this video, be sure to subscribe for more content. Also, if you want to chat or talk about video ideas, become a patron to join the GDF Discord server.